Post-eating or pre-eating?
Okay, so Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. We are live on Facebook and live on Zoom. So my name is Sister Raniah Elgendi. I am the Programs and Outreach Director for CAIR-Florida. So first of all, I just want to welcome everybody and say thank you for choosing to spend your Saturday evening with us. Tonight we have a very important topic, a very timely topic, which is knowing your rights when it comes to law enforcement and knowing your rights, if the FBI is trying to speak with you. And this really arose out of a few different circumstances. Here in Florida, we had an instance of Muslim communities, an increase in, FBI outreach to certain Muslim communities in Florida. And then, of course, now with so many people out there protesting and advocating for race equity, a lot of people have these questions of, what do we do if the police want to speak to us or if something's going to happen? So we're really grateful to be able to bring this presentation to you all, which is, how to know your rights with law enforcement. So just a few quick housekeeping items. So this is a webinar format. And, one of the benefits of the pandemic, if we can say that, is that, we can reach many more people than we typically would have been. Typically we do these Know Your Rights workshops to specific masajid or just to certain people. Sorry. And that's okay. And alhamdulillah, with virtual, we're able to reach many more people. So we are able to do it in a webinar format. And what that means is that we can't see or hear you. We want to do it in a meeting, but this way we're able to kind of live stream to Facebook as well and reach many more people who need this information. But just because we can't see or hear you doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. We want it to be a very interactive session, inshallah. So we really encourage you to engage in dialogue as we have the presentation in the chat box. Let us know what your thoughts are. And then there's also a Q&A specific feature where you can ask any questions as they come up. Just to let you know, we are going to have a Q&A at the end of the program, but also if things come up during, that strikes a question in your mind, just go ahead and put it in the Q&A section and we'll have a running list to make sure that we don't leave anyone's questions out. So with that, I think before we get to the actual presentation, I want to just introduce our panel and our guests and our speakers who we have for you today. So starting with Brother Hassan Shibly, who is the Chief Executive Director of CAIR-Florida. He's been doing this work for over 10 years and has had his fair share of run-ins with both the FBI and all types of authority figures. And so he can speak to that very well, alhamdulillah. Also joined by Brother Nezar Hamze, who also actually served as the operations director for CAIR-Florida and now is the executive director for the South Florida Muslim Federation and a law enforcement officer himself. So it's very nice to kind of have people within our community that we can turn to who have the expertise and the knowledge on these subject matters. And then I want to turn it over to Brother Hassan to introduce, the person who has the impetus behind doing this training for for so many different communities, I should say, in North Carolina and in Florida, and for so many people who need it. So Sister Macy, I want to say thank you and just lend it to Brother Hassan to kind of say a few words.
Thank you, Sister.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمد عبده ورسوله. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I want to welcome Sister Macy in particular. Jazakumullah khair. And Sister Macy actually was on the executive committee and board of CAIR-Florida when I joined. She was one of the first people that we had the pleasure of partnering with and working with. And she really helped us set up the groundwork so that CAIR-Florida can become one of the largest and most effective civil rights organizations for all people in the state of Florida, that humanity, regardless of their race, their religion, their nationality, knows that the Muslim community will stand up and protect their rights and defend justice and stand up against oppression and racism. And alhamdulillah, CAIR-Florida has grown now to have 5 offices, 25 staff. We answer over 1,000 calls for help a year. We do about over $100 million worth of positive media coverage for the Muslim community every single year. And Sister Macy was one of the founding members of our organization. So I really want to thank you for helping us organize this event. And to the North Carolina community in particular, I really want to encourage you to take advantage of having Sister Macy in your community, just like she helped establish such a powerful and effective organization that gave me the opportunity to serve the community and protect the community from FBI abuse. Likewise, inshallah, you guys can establish a similarly powerful organization in your community as well.
Jazakallah khair, brother Hassan Shibly and sister. Thank you so much for doing this, and I really appreciate your time and your energy. And as always, it's always great to work with you. It's very rewarding work, and then I'm very proud, and I'm always very appreciate with everything y'all do.
Alhamdulillah. Very good. So with that, Rania, are we ready? Should we start? Should I go ahead with the presentation?
Yeah, we can start, inshallah. What I wanted to do really quick was just to give a brief overview of CAIR-Florida's work, because I know that we have different folks on who may not be as familiar with our work. Let me know if we can get the presentation up and started, but in the meantime, I'll go ahead and I'll start. So CAIR-Florida is a national federation of independently run chapters who are working towards civil rights for Muslim Americans. So our aim is to, defend justice, to bring mutual understanding about the Muslim American community. And in a nutshell, basically, what the CAIR chapters do is we defend Muslims. We represent Muslims, we advocate for Muslims, and the right of every Muslim American to live in the country free of discrimination of any kind. So this series, this Know Your Rights series, is a whole series that covers multiple topic areas. So this is Know Your Rights for law enforcement. However, there's also Know Your Rights for employment discrimination. There's also Know Your Rights for school discrimination. There's also Know Your Rights for travel delays and some things that we'll touch upon as well. But there's a whole series of, how to advocate for yourself and understanding what rights your community has. And so anyone who's interested, in that work, can definitely reach out to Sister Macy as a CAIR liaison or to the CAIR-Florida team. And we are here to, serve the community to really provide any trainings or workshops as you guys need them. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over. We have a presentation, but honestly, we wanted you guys to hear from the sources, from the authority of, Hassan and Brother Nezar. And so we could always go through that in a little bit. But yes, so please, Hassan, take it away.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله الحمد لله رب العالمين. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share with you some critical information. Really, being a Muslim civil rights lawyer now for almost a decade, there's one message I've been trying to amplify, and we at CAIR-Florida have been trying to amplify for over a decade. And when this advice is followed, people's rights are protected. And actually, I'm not exaggerating when I say people's lives are saved. And one of the most frustrating things for me and for the CAIR-Florida family, and really for everybody who cares about the Muslim community, about civil rights, about justice, is when we encounter situations where we literally face people dying. Not forget losing their liberty, but literally instances of good people dying, losing their lives because they did not know or act upon the message that we are amplifying today. Because they didn't know their rights, because they didn't exercise their rights, ultimately they ended up dead. And honestly, I think that's what's inspired today's presentation. And I'm tired of it. For the last 10, 15 years, we've been speaking out of the community on what to do if the FBI harasses you and why it's dangerous to speak to the FBI without a lawyer. And unfortunately, not everyone has heard this message. Not everybody has acted upon this message. And then there's been rare instances where people's lives have been lost when people didn't follow this advice. So I want to share with you briefly why this is important. And I'm not over exaggerating when I say this information can save lives, not to mention protect liberty, safety, and security. So mashallah, we have a great viewing right now. A lot of people watching on Facebook Live. Take a second and please click the share button. Encourage everybody to watch this presentation about knowing your rights, what to do when you're approached by law enforcement in general or the FBI in particular. Now, the fact of the matter is, if you are Muslim in the United States, you have faced some discriminatory treatment by the government. I think the idea of traveling while Muslim is not a strange or foreign concept to many of us. We know that we often, when we travel, we get selected for random inspection. We may get held up for hours at the border, questioned about our faith, our religion. In addition, that's at the border, but even domestically, almost every single day I get a phone call, and we at CAIR-Florida get phone calls from community members, community leaders, doctors, teachers, taxi drivers, you name it, across the spectrum of the Muslim community, contacting us because they've been approached by the FBI for questioning. Why? It's because of the federal government's terrorist watch list. The federal government has a terrorist watch list, and I'm not exaggerating when I say just about every single Muslim in the United States is either on this watch list or knows somebody on this watch list. And how do you know you're on the watch list or you know somebody on the watch list? Well, if you or somebody you know has been stopped for random inspection when they travel, got an extra pat down by TSA when they travel, held by US Customs and Border Protection when they travel, or if you know somebody who's been visited by the FBI, then chances are you or somebody you know, again, is on this watch list. And this watch list is unfair, it's unconstitutional, it's discriminatory, and it treats people different basically because of their exercise of their religion, and it deprives them of due process. See, the law and the US Constitution makes very clear that you should not be deprived of your freedom, of your liberty, without a just process whereby you can challenge how you are treated by the government. And this watch list really fails on two fronts. It fails from the perspective of treating people differently based on their religion, and it fails from the perspective of depriving people of liberty, like the freedom to travel without harassment, without a fair process. So what we did is we sued the US government because of the watch list. Now, in the early days, we didn't know what we were up against. We just knew this constant experience that every single day, almost somebody calls us and the FBI's at my mission, at my business, at my school, trying to ask me questions. Whenever we travel, we get harassed. So it appeared that the government was targeting Muslims, but we didn't know for sure until we brought forward the lawsuit and we discovered, in fact, that the government does have this watch list that overwhelmingly targets the Muslim community. And guess what? After we sued last year, the federal court in Virginia found that this watch list is unconstitutional. Why do I mention this? Because the ruling in federal court in Virginia in the lawsuit brought forward by CAIR absolutely proves beyond a doubt that the federal government, through law enforcement, in particular the FBI, has treated the Muslim community differently and deprived them of rights and treated them like second-class citizens in ways that are not just offensive to the Muslim community, but that are offensive to the US Constitution and freedom and liberty for all people. This is a very important point to understand, because when I talk to you about if the FBI visit you, you may think, well, I've done nothing wrong and I've done nothing to hide. Well, the US government through the federal courts has now made clear that the government has been treating Muslims differently and has been having inappropriate interactions with them. And we should not encourage these bad practices to continue by virtue of our complacency and not knowing our rights. Now, when it comes to the FBI in particular, and I'm very excited, by the way, that we're doing this presentation with a law enforcement officer and a well-respected community leader and a big brother and a mentor, Brother Nezar Hamze, because he can speak also from the law enforcement perspective, and he's welcome to disagree or agree, and we can have a dialogue about that, inshallah, shortly. But the point is, when it comes to the FBI in particular, what we discovered is because of this watch list program, the FBI has invested a lot in hiring informants that target the Muslim community. What do these informants do? These informants do not simply go to spy on the Muslim community. What they do is they go, and I see the same pattern over and over and over again. These informants get paid a lot of money or are pressured through immigration or through criminal charges that, listen, if you don't work for us and you don't spy for us on the Muslim community, we're going to take away your paperwork and throw you in jail, or we'll pay you a lot of money, but you just got to work with us. But what does working with us mean? Does it mean merely spying? I wish it merely meant spying, because alhamdulillah, truly, most of us, we really don't have anything to hide. But they actually invest in entrapment sting operations, where they pay a lot of money to these in these cases, and they find vulnerable, mentally ill individuals within the Muslim community, and then try to trick them to agree to do some terrorist attack, and then they arrest them and, oh, we caught another Muslim terrorist, and then they continue to usurp our rights and promote fear and hate against the Muslim community. So this entrapment program is indeed very dangerous. And I myself have sat with imams that have told me, listen, the FBI showed me pictures of naked women and said, these women will testify that you use them for prostitution if you don't spy on your community for us. I was on the phone not long ago with Craig Montelay. Craig Montelay was one of the informants. He was paid a lot of money by the government to spy on the Muslim community and try to entrap people. And now he's actually working against these operations. And he straight up told me, he said, Hassan, they would actually pay me to have inappropriate relationships with Muslim women and film it and record it so then we can pressure them to become informants. And this is very different than how they treat white, other communities. So simple example was in Florida, a white American Christian man threatened to blow up a masjid and shoot all the children there. I heard the recording. When law enforcement was contacted, they arrested him right away and they slapped him on the wrist with some petty charges, and he got a year in jail and now he's out. Whereas in Florida as well, a Muslim kid who goes online critical of US foreign policies, something which isn't even illegal, what they'll do is they'll send an informant to spend a lot of time with him and coerce him, pressure him really, and brainwash him to agree to do some terrorist attack that he never would imagine doing on his own, nor could do on his own, but because he's been brainwashed. And then finally, when he agrees to do it, they arrest him and they give him 40 years in jail. So in one case, you have a white Christian man who's actually threatening to blow up a masjid, and they arrest him right away, gets a year in jail. In another case, you have a mentally ill young man who's Muslim, who's critical of US foreign policy, and they send an informant to bake up this crazy case, and then they arrest him. And in fact, the data shows that, author Trevor Aronson's done a lot of research on this issue. The data shows that in 18 out of 20 cases where a Muslim is accused of terrorism, the idea and the means came from a government informant. Now, the truth be told, I'm not really worried about anybody watching this being the victim of a government informant, because I'm sure all of us watching, inshallah, are reasonable, good people. And if somebody comes to us talking about breaking the law or doing something violent or evil, right away, our alarm bells will go up and we'll recognize that, number one, this person's either a danger to others or a danger to themselves, or he's working for the government trying to set me up. Either way, it's bad news, and it's my duty to reach out to, my local or community leadership, my local community organizations, and discuss what this person is up to, so that if need be, they can be reported to law enforcement. And this has happened. People have come speaking about violence, and we said, we should contact law enforcement about it. Turns out he's working for them. So I'm not really worried about mostly becoming the victims of an informant operation, but I am worried that some of you could potentially become the informants. How? You say, I would never become an informant. Well, it could happen when you make the mistake of speaking with the FBI without a lawyer. Very, very dangerous to speak with the FBI without a lawyer, because that's often how they recruit informants. This past week, the FBI went around and was trying to interview Muslims in the local community. And it's really amazing what our rights are in this country. I remember one of the businesses called me, and I actually went, and this is on video, I went in the establishment, and imagine how bad it is for business. You're a Muslim guy, you have your business, and 5 FBI agents show up. That's bad for business. They do this in a very callous and inappropriate way. So the FBI agents were there right away, without any fear. I told them, gentlemen, you got to leave. All right. And you want to ask my client questions? Go ahead and send them to me in writing. And this isn't my idea, right? This is what I learned from the president. The president, when the Department of Justice wanted to ask him questions, he didn't sit and meet with them. What he said was, I'll answer them with my lawyer, but the condition is you send them to me in writing. So that's what I told the agents. I said, listen, you have questions for my client? No problem. We're going to look to the president because we want to be as patriotic as possible. And what could be more patriotic than following the example of the president of the United States? When the Department of Justice wanted to ask him questions, he said, send it to me in writing. And that's what we're going to ask you to do. And they all smiled and they left because they knew they couldn't really respond to that. The truth of the matter is, and the main point I want you to understand is that a lot of times, and before I teach you what those rights are, a lot of times people say, I've done nothing nothing wrong, so I have nothing to hide, so there's no problem in me speaking to the FBI. Yes, that's true if all FBI agents were saints and there wasn't a terrorist watch list where they were inappropriately targeting the community and investing billions of dollars in entrapment cases that target the Muslim community. This is why it's important you understand the context within which we are working. And when I tell you somebody died, yes, a very simple example. Author Trevor Aronson has documented a lot of powerful stories. And one of the stories, which inshallah, perhaps maybe in a future book that I work on, mentions the story of Ibrahim Todashev. Ibrahim Todashev, like many of you, said, I have nothing to hide. The FBI wanted to speak with him. So he agreed to meet them and answer their questions. And when he agreed to meet them and answer their questions, something happened. We don't know what, because they don't record these interactions. And Ibrahim ended up with 3 bullet shots in the back, 3 in the front, and 1 in the head, killing him. And when we investigated his killing, what we discovered was that the agent who killed him did 2 things. before killing him. Number one, he had went to other Muslims in the community and gave them the option that you can either spy for us or spy for us on the hookah lounges and the halal restaurants and the masajid, or we're going to take away your paperwork and immigration paperwork and throw you in jail. So he was trying to force people to spy on hookah lounges, halal restaurants, and the masajid. I guess in one of those three, you're bound to find every Muslim, apparently. So those were their areas of targeting. So the agent was doing that before he killed Ibrahim. In another instance, we discovered also that the agent who killed Ibrahim, his name is Aaron McFarlane, he was sued twice and investigated 4 times for beating up suspects, beating up witnesses, and falsifying evidence. And he's the individual that ultimately killed Ibrahim Todashev. And he became an FBI agent and killed Ibrahim, even though he had such a horrible past. So the point is, there's a lot of good FBI agents. Heck, there's a lot of great law enforcement officers. Mashallah, we're privileged to have Nezar with us as one great example. And there's a lot of great sheriff's departments and local law enforcement as well. But again, when somebody's coming up to you as law enforcement and they want to talk to you and you've done nothing wrong, you don't know who you're interacting with. So it's very important to understand these rights that I tell you. The first is the First Amendment. The First Amendment.
Well, Hassan, can I jump in real fast? Real quick, inshallah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I just wanted to rewind a little bit. Hassan was talking about something that happens actually quite often, and our communities are not equipped. We don't have the infrastructure really to deal with it, but it's something that we need to discuss and create a good way forward for you in case you're a community member or a community leader that happens to come across somebody that maybe is acting a little strange, and you're not quite sure what to do. So, matter of fact, just this week, CAIR-Florida got a call about somebody in the community that is known in the community that has started expressing some serious concerns for U.S. foreign policy and, the spying on the Muslims and the Muslims being oppressed by the government, and saying some pretty aggressive things. So historically, what I've seen, for those of you that don't know me, I also worked with Hassan. I worked with CAIR-Florida just over a decade. Typically what I would see is the community would just maybe kick that person out of the community. And again, these are people that are known, family is known, and they start saying, you know what, you're trespassed from the masjid, or we don't want that stuff around here, get out of here. And what happens is that person becomes alienated. And unfortunately, there's only a couple of options for someone like that. I was involved in quite a bit of anti-ISIS work with.
I think your sound cut off. Just for a second, you should be back now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. As I said, when ISIS was a thing, back some years ago, I was involved with various governments. Fighting back against that push. Even there was several cases here in Florida where somebody was recruited. But what happens is as members of the community leadership, we don't give help or try to help the individuals that need help. There's a couple of people that are going to grab them. More than likely, like Hassan said, most likely it's going to be an agent provocateur that will, deal with the individual, go whatever operation they are doing, and that person may end up being arrested and be put into jail. Or that person may try to do something that is not a good decision, not safe for himself or herself or anyone in the community, and or leave the country to do something bad. So the reason why I want to just touch on that is no one is going to watch out for us. No one is going to care for members of the community. Our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, if we don't wake up in the morning and care about our Muslim brothers or, a fellow Muslim, that we are not Muslim. So I just want to just mention that before Hassan jumps back over and says, if you do see somebody that needs help, calling law enforcement always is not the answer. Law enforcement's job is, my job is to serve and protect. And we have a very structured system that we work in. However, rehabilitation is not that. Law enforcement doesn't do that. So it falls back on the professionals in the community to do that. So thanks for letting me jump in, Hassan. Please take it back.
Appreciate that.
And I'll jump in, inshallah.
Nezar brings together a very important point, because we deal with something like this once a year at least. The issue is not being critical with foreign policy. I'm extremely critical of foreign policy. We all should be. U.S. foreign policy has led to the deaths of literally millions of innocent civilians throughout the world. The U.S. domestic policy was one that was initially founded on the slave trade and escalated then, with extreme treatment of the Black community in terms of slavery, then with Jim Crow laws and state-sponsored segregation. So there's a lot of issues with the United States. And alhamdulillah, the truth of the matter is, despite these issues, we still have more freedom to practice our faith here than most other places in the world. And it's our job to engage, to make America a just nation for all people, whether that's with the Black Lives Matter movement, whether that's in civil rights, fighting racism. So I don't want people to be confused. There's nothing wrong with being critical of U.S. foreign policy. And that's not in and of itself an alarm bell. But I think in the cases Nezar is referencing, it's sometimes people then who fall down a takfiri mentality where they start calling everybody who disagrees with them kafir. And then they start talking about violence, not without really planning something, but this person should die and that person should die. And you can tell when somebody's mentally ill. And those are the points when you really need to get involved as a community and get these people mental help. The government's job is once somebody's broken the law. And unfortunately, a lot of times in these situations, if individuals that are, clearly mentally ill and espousing sympathy for violence against innocent civilians, if they haven't fallen into breaking the law as of yet, if the community doesn't intervene and get them the help that they need, what the government's going to do is send an informant that will push them over the edge into breaking the law and then arrest them. So, I really appreciate Nezar's point that if people, again, we don't want to become thought police for each other, but if people are clearly, unwell, espousing support for things that are antithetical to our values and principles as Muslims, advocating for violence against civilians, etc., that's when we really got to get involved and get them the mental health help that they need and the guidance, before they are preyed upon by those who don't wish the community well. So again, very importantly, what are your rights if you're approached by law enforcement? There's a chance that you will be, or somebody has been approached by the law enforcement in general, the FBI in particular. Well, first of all, understand the following things. The greatest law of the United States is the U.S. Constitution, right? That is the supreme law of the land. That's what we've taken an oath to protect. The U.S. Constitution has something called the Bill of Rights, starting with the First Amendment. The First Amendment guarantees our freedom of religion and freedom of speech. What does that mean? That means the government cannot and should not treat you differently based on your political views. It cannot target you and should not target you because you are critical of U.S. foreign policy, for example. It should not treat you differently because of your religion. But the problem is, in practicality, it has, and it does. And that is why it's important to understand the remainder of the amendments, which essentially protect the First Amendment. The next is the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment is very important. It gives you the right to remain silent when you're approached by law enforcement. It gives you the right to remain silent. Now, look, again, a lot of times people say, I'm innocent, I haven't done anything bad, so why should I remain silent? Look, the right to remain silent, frankly, wasn't just put to protect those that maybe are criminals or have done something wrong. The right to remain silent was put to protect the innocent, because the founding fathers of the United States recognized that when innocent people speak to law enforcement without a lawyer, then innocent people may get themselves in trouble. So remember the Fifth Amendment, the right to remain silent. Next is the Sixth Amendment. That gives you the right to a lawyer if you're facing charges. So if you combine the Fifth and the Sixth Amendment, we can say you really have the right to not speak to the FBI, not speak to them without a lawyer. So what should you do if the FBI show up and they want to speak to you at your business, at your home, at your school? Well, first of all, understand that the FBI by law is allowed to lie to you, but you are not allowed to lie to them. Again, the FBI is allowed to lie to you, but you are not allowed to lie to them. How dangerous can it be to talk to somebody who's lying to you, perhaps, but you're not allowed to lie to them. And when they're lying to you, maybe you get confused and you're trying to make sense of their lies. So as you're trying to rationalize what they're saying, maybe you make a mistake in what you're saying, you end up lying to them. What happens when you lie to them? You commit a federal offense called the 1001 violation, punishable by 5 years in jail minimum, could be up to 8 years in jail just for lying. And that's how they hook in the informants. They say, you spoke to us. And guess what? I will tell you this. One of the last people that I know who spoke to the FBI without a lawyer, he committed that offense. And we spoke now, and he's an innocent person, not a bad guy, but was so freaked out. Speaking of the FBI, he accidentally gave them wrong information. And we had to clean up the mess and reach out to the FBI and reach out to the attorneys and make sure that he doesn't get charged now. Could destroy his life, or he could be pressured to become an informant. And this was just about 2 weeks ago. Nobody will have any idea who I'm referencing, and that's why I mention it. Very, very dangerous to speak to the FBI without a lawyer. And that's why our role is so important, because if FBI has a legitimate mission, legitimate investigation, well, then we can meet with the person they want to speak to and train them on how to answer truthfully without violating their rights or the rights of others. So it's in everybody's best interest that lawyers are involved. So again, remember, they can lie to you. You're not allowed to lie to them. Remember, and speaking to them without a lawyer can make a lot of problems for you, because remember, in the United States, you're innocent until proven guilty. You cannot talk yourself out of trouble. You can only talk yourself into trouble. That's why when they arrest somebody, they say anything you say can and will be used against you. They're warning you, be careful what you speak. So my very simple advice to everybody, because normally, and I was told, I have 15 minutes to do this, and normally I do an hour and a half presentation. So I'm going to try to condense it a little bit, try to get some insight as well from Nezar. But the truth of the matter is, if the FBI show up at your home, at your school, at your place of employment, first of all, if you're at your home, I would advise actually against opening the door to let them in. Ask, do you have a warrant? If they have a warrant, then you should open the door and obviously allow them to search. Don't interfere with them physically, whatever the warrant allows them to search for, but do not grant them consent to search more than what the warrant allows them to search for. Even if they have a warrant, you're under no obligation to answer any question. It's highly advisable not to speak to them without a lawyer. If you live in Florida, you can call CAIR-Florida. We'll provide you with free lawyers, free of charge, that can help with that. If you don't have a CAIR chapter in your state, you better start one, because it's a great investment for the community. And if you're watching this and you want to fund our efforts to protect the community, please be sure to click the donate button to support the good work that we're doing. But alhamdulillah, CAIR-Florida provides free lawyers, free of charge. And you can also work with Sister Macy, inshallah, to help establish a chapter in your local community. And we do this literally all the time. And, minimum, if you're going to hire a private lawyer, it could be $2,500 to $5,000 per FBI interaction. We do these almost daily, completely free for the community. Alhamdulillah. So if they don't have a warrant, just say, I don't want to talk to you without a lawyer. That's it. I don't want to talk to you without a lawyer. Let me have your card, and then contact CAIR, and we can help you find free lawyers to deal with it. Do not let them coerce you or trick you into speaking to them without a lawyer. It's a very foolish and dangerous thing to do. They'll say, oh, if you got nothing to hide, you shouldn't worry about speaking with us. You don't need CAIR. You don't need a lawyer. It will make it worse. Okay, thank you, but I don't want to talk to you without a lawyer. The Prophet said, "Man samata naja," whoever is quiet will be free and safe. If you're innocent, if you haven't done anything wrong, again, do not speak to them without a lawyer. Say, I don't want to talk to you without a lawyer, and contact CAIR, and CAIR will get you a free lawyer. The most dangerous thing you can do, really, is speak to the FBI without a lawyer. It's very dangerous. It's very foolish, and I've seen lives destroyed because of that. And alhamdulillah, we've helped thousands of people who've been approached by the FBI. I will tell you this. Every one of them who said, I don't want to talk to you without a lawyer, and contacted us, alhamdulillah, their issues were properly resolved. The only people who ended up in serious problems or even dead, and there's multiple, it wasn't just Sami Asmaka, it wasn't just Ibrahim Todashev who ended up dead, but multiple people. It was those who took the risk of talking to them without a lawyer. Many, many threats. It probably, most likely, you're not going to end up dead like Mr. Todashev, but who knows, you may make a mistake in speaking with them, and therefore you've committed a violation that can subject you to jail time or can subject you into becoming an informant. So my 2 cents, and then I want to invite Nezar sort of comment on that. I really think only the ignorant or the arrogant speak to the FBI without a lawyer. It's a very dangerous thing to do. And if they ever contact you, tell them, I do not want to talk to you without a lawyer. That it will protect you, will protect your rights. The lawyer will come, will investigate, will train you, will deal with the situation. We'll see if it's even helpful or necessary for you to speak with them or not. You lose nothing. You have everything to gain and nothing to lose by getting a lawyer. At the same time, understand that by speaking with them without a lawyer, you have nothing to gain. You can gain nothing by it because you're already innocent until proven guilty. When you talk to them, you can't be more innocent through talking to them. You don't have to convince them you're innocent or guilty. If you get charged, you got to convince a jury or a judge, but that'll be a different situation. You literally can gain nothing by speaking to them, but you can lose a lot, especially if you make a mistake. You can either hurt yourself, hurt your family, hurt your friends, and end up in a very bad situation. So that's the main thing. Again, I can go on for an hour, but the main point is never, ever speak to the FBI without a lawyer. Nezar, I would love your input on that. Is it a good idea for people to speak to the FBI without a lawyer? And then if you can also speak about some of the more routine interactions with law enforcement as well.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. First, I want to explain to everybody, I know we have a lot of immigrants, people that were not raised in this country. I just want to briefly go over the different types of law enforcement and briefly talk about the different types of crime that they investigate. So Hassan was speaking very in-depth and very elegantly about the FBI, which is a federal law enforcement agency, along with, there are many other federal law enforcement agencies, DHS, ICE, ATF, there's a lot. And specifically, as I said in my time at CAIR, there is an unbalanced and an unequal amount of focus from the FBI focusing on the Muslim community. One of my brothers that I worked with for quite a while, actually Wilfredo, I don't know if he's online, but he travels quite a bit, and he had told me a story, and it was an interesting story, and it still sticks out to this day, but he's right, that, when the Muslim community have banquets and they do different functions, for some particular reason, the FBI just happens to almost magically be there. And Alfredo had, there was I believe a Islam in Spanish somewhere in Texas, and I believe that his comment was, he goes, why are you here? Because he goes to Jewish functions, Christian functions, all different types of functions with different members of the community. And the FBI isn't there. I'm not saying they don't have community outreach, but they do. And he hit a point, and that's true. The FBI has a job to do. Full disclosure, I've had family in the FBI. And I know a lot of the agents are very loving, caring people. However, they have a job to do. They are not there to be your friend. They are doing a job. So that is good advice. And I can tell you that that's not just with the FBI, that's with any law enforcement. If you are part of some sort of investigation, you have a right to attorney. And guess what? What's the first thing they teach me as a law enforcement officer if I'm ever being investigated? The number one thing they teach us is get an attorney. Do not say anything to anybody. You get an attorney, and you let the attorney deal with the law enforcement that's investigating.
Wait, Nezar, just to clarify. So as a law enforcement officer, you're a law enforcement officer, you got a badge, you keep the community safe. And as you became an official law enforcement officer, you got training, right? And they trained you, the law enforcement agencies that you may work for, they trained you that if the law enforcement ever wants to investigate you, that you don't talk without a lawyer?
Absolutely. That's the first thing that you're taught. Everyone's hearing a lot of stuff about police unions and stuff like that, but that's absolutely a no line cross. Law enforcement themselves, if they are ever part of an investigation, they will say not even a word. They'll basically say, my attorney will contact you, and that's it.
Wow, that's I've never thought of that. So we are basically putting the Muslim community on exactly what law enforcement trains its own officers about.
Correct. Yeah. So, okay, so let me keep going. So we have federal law enforcement. Those, typically focus on not the same type of crimes that state or local. So federal law enforcement, talking about FBI, obviously, is Homeland Security, terrorism, white collar type crimes, large scale drug type operations, fraud type operations. Those are the type of investigations that the federal government usually involved with. They have a different set of resources and different jurisdictions. Federal government obviously have jurisdiction throughout all of the United States. An agent can go anywhere effortlessly and continue on his work. Then we have state agencies. Every state looks different as far as what their state police look like here. In Florida, we have the Florida Highway Patrol. We have FDLE agents. We have, Florida Wildlife, Florida Fish and Game, and the troopers. Those are state police. And they all each have their own jurisdiction, and they do what they do. And they have interaction probably as a little more than the federal government would. And I think to wrap the conversation into today's Know Your Rights, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth. I'm sure there's a lot of questions, and that will be local law enforcement. So local law enforcement, you have your local police agencies, your local municipality police, and your sheriff's departments. And that's where the majority of the interaction with our citizens in this country happen, is between local law enforcement and the citizens that we're serving and protecting. So it's important that we talk a little bit more in depth, and I would love for the moderators to take questions, because it's really it needs to be a conversation. I can tell you that to give you an example, if you get pulled over and you don't say anything to the officer that's pulling you over, and they ask you for your driver's license, and you don't comply, and you say, get my attorney, you're probably going to take a ride to jail. Because the reason that the officer pulled you over is there was a traffic infraction, and by law in Florida and also in North Carolina, if you sign for that license, you are agreeing to produce identification to that law enforcement officer. So there are certain requirements that you need to comply with when you're, let's say, participating in a traffic stop. The officer will come say, hey, I need your driver's license, registration, and insurance. You certainly have, you're not going to be compelled to answer any questions. You don't need to answer any questions. However, we're talking about just that transaction. However, I can tell you personally, if I'm pulling somebody over, it's, because they're going way, way, way too fast. I just want to see what's going on, see if they're okay. If we have, situations that we can use our discretion, we use our discretion. It's important that you know that. So if, you catch more bees with honey or with sugar than you're gonna, with, bad talk or hard talk, the officer is probably going to say, okay, I'll be right back, and come back and give you, a traffic citation. Regarding different types of local investigations, there's so many what ifs now. As Hassan said, when you are dealing with local law enforcement, and I want to give real live examples. So anybody that is having any questions, please jump in. And inshallah, we will talk very in depth, and especially about what's going on now. Let's say, for instance, there is another type of common interaction, maybe a domestic disturbance at your house. Okay. The law enforcement officer will come to your house. The reason why they're there, someone activated 911, they come to the house, and they're investigating. Now that's an exigent circumstance. That means somebody is in a safety issue. The law enforcement has a right to be there. If you open the door and you're talking to law enforcement, and let's say, for instance, a 911 call comes out and says, help, get off my neck, or, don't hit me. When we get to the house, if somebody answers the door and doesn't let us in, police have a right to go in. That's an exigent circumstance, because we want to make sure that people are safe in the house. That's something we don't need a warrant to enter the house, because we're trying to save somebody's life. We're trying to make sure everybody's safe. That's an example. But let's say, for instance, in that same situation, you come in, you're talking, do you have a right to an attorney at that point? The answer is absolutely. Absolutely, you have a right. Before you answer any questions from any law enforcement officer in any investigation, you have a right to an attorney. And the law enforcement, obviously, we're trained. You guys heard of Miranda. Before anyone asks you any type of incriminating questions, where it's a custodial interrogation situation, the law enforcement officer should be reading you your Miranda rights. That means if you yourself or the person being questioned is a subject of a criminal investigation and they are being questioned by law enforcement, they should have their Miranda rights met to them. Is that going to stop them from being arrested if they don't? No, that they'll be a little bit downstream in the judicial process.
So Brother Nezar, we do actually have a few questions coming in, so maybe it'll be helpful to kind of give those live situations that you had mentioned. So the first one is, I mean, not to hammer the nail, but people are saying, you know, when you're talking to police officers, how do you know which questions to answer versus like which ones you have to answer versus which ones you don't? And I guess the answer, I mean, the answer would be like none, right? You don't have to answer anything until you have your attorney. So your attorney basically will decide which questions you would want to answer and which ones not to. But I guess the question for you is how to prevent that situation from escalating, right? Like maybe the officer is trying to speak with you.
Yeah, let me finish the domestic situation. And you know, inshallah, none of the watchers are in domestic situations in their house, but I just want to give the example so you guys can think downstream. So let's say, for instance, me as the officer, I get to the house, and I identify one of the spouses as, you know, maybe that person struck the other person and the other person got injured, right? Now, I don't need to speak to the person that hit the other person to make an arrest. I don't need to. I can get the information from witnesses, from, you know, video, from the victim, from just, there's so many different things. I don't need to speak to the, let's say in this situation, the suspect or the offender to make an arrest. So let's say, for instance, that suspect or offender says, you know what, I'm not talking to you without my attorney. That's his right. Right? That's her right. So let's not, you know, I don't want to get biased here. That's his or her right. However, if there's evidence that probable cause that they've committed domestic battery, they're going to jail. It doesn't matter if they speak to the officer or not. So understand that. It's very important that the community understands that. The reason why I gave that example is because there are times where you may want to talk to law enforcement. Let me give you an example. Something happened the other day that something happened quite frequently. And then I'll get into the answering the questions, inshallah. Okay. So we were on was on duty and a call came out. There's a burglary in progress. Someone who was breaking into a store. Description came out. In this particular situation was a black male wearing a black shirt, black pants, and dreads. We get to the location. I get to the location. I see somebody walking at me very briskly. Black shirt, black pants, and dreads. Immediately take that person, detain that person, and start talking to him. And, you know, something interesting happened in that conversation. He goes, you know, you stopped me because I'm black, right? So what we've seen is, and historically, we've seen officers that are very belligerent, that, you know, very commando, pound your chest type attitude, saying, shut the heck up, whatever they say. They throw the person down to the ground and they continue. Now, in that particular situation, I'm not like that. There are those that know me. I talked to him. I said, listen, thank you for cooperating. We just had a burglary call. Someone said there's burglarizing. You fit the description to the T. You have the same physical description. You have the hair length, dread description, everything. If you're not the person, you're going to be out of here soon, right? So a little bit further investigating, it turned out not to be him. Apologize, let the young man go. He thanked me. He said, thanks for doing your job and you're done. Now, he did engage with me. He did speak with me. There may be a situation where that particular person wasn't involved in anything and says, I'm not talking to you without my attorney. No problem. Because right when somebody says that, the police shut their mouth, or supposed to, and say, okay, so now what do the police do? The police have to use other forms of investigation. We can't question the suspect, right? So if all we have to go off of, there was a black male, black male 6 foot with black shirt, black pants, and dreads. He just robbed them. Well, we pretty much have the guy because he's right here. He's right around the corner from the place. Obviously, there's other forms of identification, show up, and things like that. So the reason why I'm telling you that is there may be situations you're definitely going to want to consult with your attorney. I'm not an attorney, but where it may benefit you, especially and these types of local situations in dealing with law enforcement. So hopefully that kind of opens up the questions in the dialogue. So you can go ahead with the questions and I'll answer as much.
On that point, Nezar, so there was a client we assisted, a gentleman who was attacked, not at CAIR we assisted, but separately, that he was attacked by his girlfriend with a knife, right? Yeah. So naturally the police bust in and they see blood, they see a knife. He happened to be a big black man. He had a white girlfriend, so guess who they were going to go arrest? You know, assumed that he was attacking her. So they took him down, and put him in the squad car. So he was able to communicate at that point. He said, "Listen, the interaction is filmed. She was attacking me, and I just tried to protect myself." And at first they weren't listening. He said, "Listen to me. Check it out." And then when they did review the footage, they did find exactly she was the one who attacked him. They apologized, let him go, and they ended up arresting her. It can be very risky to speak to law enforcement without an attorney. And the general rule is don't do it. But at the same time, you have to use you have to use the context and your intellect. So there's different scenarios, and these scenarios are very, very different. For example, if I get pulled over for speeding, I'm not going to admit I was speeding. I'm also not going to be like, I'm not answering questions. Here's my ID. Let me go. You have to feel out the situation. So in this kind of situation where, you're going fast, and you get pulled over for that, have the ID, and your paperwork ready. Get the information on the officer, speak in a respectful manner. If you find that they're going into personal questions, things that are not their business, things that could open up doors, especially if it's about your political beliefs, your religious beliefs, say, I'm not going to answer any questions without a lawyer, but be respectful. That's very different in these circumstances that you were describing, where there's a context, very different than the cases we were talking about in the FBI, where they're literally just showing up at your place of business. They're showing up at your place of education. They're showing up at your home without any legitimate reason that you're aware of. And you don't know what their intentions are. If somebody pulls me over for speeding, I know I was speeding. I'll give them my license. I'm just going to ramble on. Or if there was a crime, right in front of me, and they're approaching me, okay, I may understand why they're coming in and communicate, with that. But at the same time, if I have to choose between one or the other, I would always err on the side of caution. Because I'll give you the example with this individual. Had he remained silent, maybe he would have been arrested, but he definitely would not have been convicted. His name would have been clear. I think the fear is, had he communicated and it was a cop with evil intention, maybe that communication could have opened up some doors of problem for him. But I don't think that would have been very likely. But it's still, had he remained silent, he may have been arrested, but he would have been cleared. My problem with the Muslim community in particular, when we speak to FBI agents without an attorney, is you're trying to clear your name and you don't end up clearing your name. But again, these agents, you don't know what intentions they're coming in with. So again, use the context. And you can speak a little bit more about these contexts, Nezar. The FBI,
I think it's
somebody for speeding,
it definitely very much is important on context and the situation. Everyday situations, many of you hopefully have had pleasant experiences with law enforcement. And something that somebody told me resonated with me, and, talking, everyone said, you know what, Nezar, a lot of officers are just not like you. They're just not nice like you. They just don't communicate like you. And you got to know that. So I understand that. I understand that. So Hassan is giving good advice that, you do have a right to an attorney. So I just wanted to give that example. Raniah, is there any more specific examples that are being brought up in question that I can dive into?
Yeah, there are a few, and then I think what we'll do is we'll take the last 5 minutes to go through that presentation that we had mentioned in the comments, just to kind of give some folks some visual references. But the other thing is that, okay, we know what our rights are. We know how we should handle the situation. We know how hopefully the police are trained to approach a situation. And let's say that we find ourselves in a situation where that's not happening, right? So I'm refusing to answer them. Maybe the cops are mishandling me, or maybe they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Then what is my, how should I approach that situation? They're violating my right? So should I kind of put up resistance? How should I handle it in the moment that that's happening?
That's a good question. And I think that's where a lot of the difficulty comes with a lot of the situations that we're seeing on TV, as far as things escalating. Law enforcement officers are given the authorization from the state to detain you, to question you, and to take away your liberty. Okay, that the law enforcement officer is the only one in the country that can do that. Now, if you feel that your rights are being violated, and you feel that the law enforcement officer himself is not following the law or doing something criminal, absolutely under no circumstances are you to physically resist that officer. If we have time, I'll go over that, because I think there's a lot of questions about use of force and things like that. So I'll definitely, speak about that. But at no time do you ever take it upon yourself to physically resist a law enforcement officer in the line of their duty, whenever they're doing. You are not authorized as a citizen to do that. You are putting yourself in a very dangerous situation, and rightfully so for yourself, because everyone sees what's going on. There's a lot of cops that use excessive force. Also for the citizen, also for the police. Just, obviously, I'm in the law enforcement community and the family. There are people literally hunting police, walking up to police and shooting them. So it's a very dangerous situation. And the goal of any interaction or any transaction with law enforcement is for everyone to go home safe, for the law enforcement officer and for the citizen to go home safe. So if you think that your rights are being violated, immediately ask for a supervisor, immediately. That doesn't mean that the officer is going to stop doing what they're doing. Say, officer, let's say Hamze, Officer Hamze, I want to speak to your supervisor. If somebody asks me for that, no problem. I get on my radio, I need a supervisor to respond, they do that. Now, does that mean I'm going to stop doing my job? Absolutely not. Does that mean that the person that I'm speaking to has they've pulled out a mulligan card and said, okay, I don't have to listen to you till your supervisor gets here? Absolutely not. That person will continue to, comply if I've asked them to move somewhere or do something or give me their ID. They have to do that.
And then things, I guess, within the power of an individual to do would be obviously to record whenever possible. So if you can record the situation safely, right? If an officer is telling you once you're under arrest, for example, you may not be able to keep your phone recording, obviously. But if you're able to record up until that point, that you should definitely. And then also that you can verbalize how your complaint, right? So you can verbalize you're mistreating me or you're using excessive force, because that might be able to help you later on, right? When you're kind of going through the civil rights process of processing that complaint, as well as just taking in all the details that you can, the officer's name, their badge number, having that information so that you can kind of address the situation after the fact.
Yeah, correct. I can, everybody's different, but I can just, give some general advice. And you probably guys seen, everyone's on TikTok and watching all kinds of videos online and social media and things like that. If you believe an officer is doing something wrong, I would use a different tactic than what I'm seeing. Use a nice, calm, low tone voice and communicate with the officer. Because what I do see is I see a lot of people raising their voice and they start yelling. So what happens when people start raising their voice and they start yelling? I would be calm and take a step back and try to de-escalate. But a lot of officers aren't like that. They will also start to escalate. Their voice is going to go up. Their adrenaline is going to go up. And what's going to happen? Ultimately, there's going to be some sort of force happen. And if it happens like that, then that's what we're trying to avoid. So that's I've seen it a lot. I've seen both situations. And it's, unfortunate that it has to get like that, but it's important to use some life experience. If there's a tense situation, bring your voice down, talk at a calm little voice. The officer should bring their voice down at that point, and the communication will be open.
Okay, perfect.
So on that point, Raniah, sorry, very quickly, you mentioned a few things that, I think it's important to go into little details. When you come across interaction with a law enforcement officer, if you're able, especially if it's somebody else's interaction, if you can safely record, then that's something that may not be a bad idea to do, to safely record that interaction. And the main thing is ask, am I free to go? Am I free to go or am I detained? If they say you're free to go, just go. You can deal with the ticket later, the citation later, whatever it is. You're not going to win an argument. There's no point in that. Am I free to go? If they say you're free to go, you're good. If they say, no, you're being detained, then at that point, say, okay, I don't want to talk to you without a lawyer. And that's it. And if you feel like there's, inappropriate behavior, say, okay, I wish to speak to a supervisor, but I don't want to speak to you without a lawyer. And then wait for the first opportunity you're given to actually call CAIR or call an attorney. Now, once that point, they'll say you've been detained, I don't want to talk to you without a lawyer. At that point, you can't go anywhere. Don't physically resist. Don't fight. Sometimes the officer is in the wrong. He's wrongfully arresting you. So you say, am I free to go? No, you're under arrest. Well, and then you're like, no, I didn't do anything wrong. You're trying to resist. No, don't do that. Open up a whole can of worms. Again, physically comply. If they're physically trying to arrest you, you have to let them arrest you. Don't run away from the officers. Certainly don't attack. Comply with their orders of move here, don't move here. If they say you're not free to go, you're under arrest, that's it. Comply with the orders physically, but again, don't communicate and speak and talk and argue.
Examples, I'll just jump in with Hassan since it's moving good. Examples of being detained are a traffic stop. When you're in a traffic stop, if they pull you over and they just start some weird conversation with you and they don't ask you for your license or registration, I don't know, but most of the times they do, then you can certainly say what Hassan said, say, am I free to go? Am I detained? If they say, no, you can go, then go. You don't have to say anything more. However, if the officer says, no, you are detained, I need your license, registration, and insurance, then you are not free to go. I've seen some social media posts and, things like that where I guess the person being stopped didn't think that they were violating any type of traffic law. And they said, you know what, I don't have to give you my license. I know my rights. Right? Which is not correct because you agreed with the state in whatever state you are, but I can talk for Florida. You agreed when you signed that and got your driver's license by the state that whenever you're asked by a law enforcement officer to provide proof that you can operate a motor vehicle, that is the law. So you not providing that identification is a violation, right? That's one example of being detained, a traffic stop. Another one is the example that I gave. Let's say, for instance, Ebola went out, or be on the lookout. Somebody matches a description, right? So let's say in that one particular situation, I stopped that young man and he fought me. He actually, and you see this a lot, right? I attempted to stop him. I said, hey, stop. And I tried to put him in cuffs and he physically resisted me and he fought me. That is a dangerous situation. Mm-hmm. That is dangerous.
Can you expand on that? So that's a question that we get often. And I guess we'll wrap up. We'll take a couple more questions, go through the PDF and close because I know some people have to go. But sure. This is an important point. So people always, the conversation is around, excessive use of force. And sometimes, obviously, we know, especially seeing what's happening with the protests, sometimes officers absolutely do, overstep and use excessive force. But I think another piece of it, the other side of it, is that the public doesn't really understand how police officers are trained on use of force, right? And how you can't just aim for the hands and not, things like that. So maybe you can give us a little bit of insight to that.
And Nezar, before we jump into that, just one point I want to emphasize, when we said, even if the officer's in the wrongfully arresting you, you comply with his, orders. When he says you're not free to go, he asks for your ID, you show the ID, but you don't have to have a conversation or communicate with him. Then if he says, get out of the car, I'm placing you under arrest, get out of the car and let them place you under, don't make them drag you out, don't resist. Because if they're in the wrong, we're going to win with that on the back end. As soon as you get in touch with the attorneys and we get involved and we investigate and we can hold the officers accountable. Don't try to win with the officer on the spot or resist on the spot. Again, you have to physically comply with their lawful orders if they're placing you under arrest. But don't worry about it. If they're violating your rights, if they're in the wrong, we can win that on the back end, and we have many times. But if you start getting in a physical altercation, that can open up a very, a door of very difficult circumstance. Go ahead, Nezar.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump into use of force, but I just want to give you guys some wisdom, because I'm not sure if Tanya is on this call, but we also have what's called the Fourth Amendment. So Hassan, what's the Fourth Amendment?
So the government cannot search your car, your home, your business,
your person,
person without a warrant or probable cause. Very, very important.
Correct. So if you believe that you're in a situation where your rights have been violated, I can tell you from wisdom and experience that your day in court and possible civil court following up for you filing a lawsuit with your attorney against the agency for violating your civil rights is a lot more productive than you physically resisting on the spot and getting into a fight with an officer. So be wise, have patience, and something that our community historically has never done is if you do have a transaction with a law enforcement officer and an encounter that wasn't pleasant, you weren't treated with respect, you think your rights were violated, absolutely you need to contact CAIR. Okay, they do this all day long, thousands of complaints. However, what's also going to happen is there's going to be an internal investigation triggered. Okay, there will be an investigation into that officer. Most agencies now wear body cams. We'll be able to see and hear everything that was said during the transaction or the encounter with the citizen, and that's good because what historically has happened, people haven't filed these complaints and the bad behavior just keeps continuing. Now, the advantage is when you have an attorney, when you have a force like CAIR behind you, there's a lot of attention brought to the issue. Okay, so know that. All right, so let me shift gears to use of force because I think this is where a lot of people have questions.
Sorry, before you jump in right on use of force, and that's a great place to jump into. Just I want to emphasize something on the Fourth Amendment real quick because I didn't emphasize that in my main message. The Fourth Amendment is essential to understand, which says the government again has no business searching your house, your home, your car, your masjid. So very, very important. If the law enforcement wants to enter your house, your home, your car, whatever it is, do not give them permission. I do not consent to a search. If they have a warrant, then they're going to be able to search it. And if they have probable cause, for example, if they see the murder weapon in the car and somebody was just stabbed and they see a bloody knife in the seat, yeah, they're going to be able to search it, But absent probable cause or warrant, they can't. And I would advise people not to consent to a search without speaking with attorney first and making sure your rights are protected. Now, but if they proceed to search anyway, again, don't physically stop them. Don't interfere. Don't get in the way. But verbalize that. Say, I do not consent to a search. You can say that orally. I don't consent to a search. I don't want to talk to that lawyer. That will preserve your rights. Then the lawyers on the back end can fight and say, hey, that search was inappropriate. That search was wrong, and we can hold them accountable.
Correct. Very good. Okay, so let's talk about use of force. See a lot of questions popping up on the screen here. So how is law enforcement trained for use of force? Okay, I can tell you that from when I first started law enforcement in 2012 till now, the training has changed tremendously. A lot of law enforcement agencies, I'm not saying everyone, I'm saying a lot of law enforcement agencies have really focused on de-escalation. Okay, which means using verbal techniques to de-escalate the situation instead of immediately going hands-on and having to use force. So I just want to make that very clear. I cannot speak for other agencies, and I can only talk about the training that I've gone through. And certainly de-escalation is something from many years ago that we've started trying to really drill down and use the de-escalation techniques. All right, so here's the nuts and bolts. Use of force. When are we legally able to use force? Okay, so I'm gonna break it down very simple so everybody understands. And that way there's no confusion because I think that's important so everyone clearly understands. If I'm gonna use Hassan, you're my example. Is that okay? Can I use you, Hassan?
Go ahead.
I arrive on a scene and Hassan is on the scene and Hassan is recording, which he can record. I just want to be clear. Hassan can record. There's no law against that. If he's not interfering with my investigation. And there's tape. There's police tape around the scene. And Hassan's on the outside of the tape and he's recording. It's great, no problem. He can do that. But Hassan makes a decision to come on the other side of the police tape while he's recording because he wants to get a little closer to the what's going on. So I give him a verbal order. I say, Mr. Shibly, I need you to go on the other side of that tape. You are now interfering with my investigation. He refuses. This is what we call passive resistance. Passive resistance, which means he's not physically doing anything. He's just not listening to me, right? So Hassan says, I ain't going anywhere. And he keeps taping, right? So this is called passive resistance. That means I'm giving you an order, a loud, clear verbal order. You see me in my uniform. You see my patrol. You know this is a police scene. You're not confused if I'm law enforcement or not, and you're not listening to my lawful order. When you don't comply, that's called passive resistance. Now, what can we do in response to that? Now, by law, we can up this interaction one notch. So now what I can do is I'm going to say, I'm going to try to talk Hassan because I don't want to get into a force with anyone. I say, listen, man, you can record. Just come on the other side over here, please. Just do that. Just listen. Does an officer have to do that? No. The officer has to give you an order by law, a lawful order. So let's just say, for instance, he doesn't comply. So now by law, I can grab Hassan, an appropriate amount of force. I'm not going to just tackle him. I can grab Hassan by the arm and I can move him. I can physically move him because he's not, okay, Hassan, you're not listening to me. I'm moving you to the other side of the line. Now, the first type of resistance was passive resistance. The next type of resistance is called active resistance. So Hassan doesn't like when I grab him. And this is where you see a lot of the situations happen now on the street and social media and video. Hassan takes his arm and rips it out of my arm. He says, get off me, right? That's now called active resistance. So it goes from passive to active. So now what can I as a law enforcement officer do? I can go up one. So now I can use the appropriate amount of force to take Hassan into custody now, right? So instead of grabbing Hassan by the arm, maybe I'm going to transition to a less than lethal weapon. I can grab my pepper spray. I can grab my taser. Again, giving loud orders to Hassan. Hassan, I'm trying to tell you to go on the other side of this line here. You're pulling away from me. You're being resistant, right? Now I can use the appropriate amount of force, which would include a less than lethal. I can use my pepper spray. I can use my taser, and I can tase Hassan and then pick him up off the ground after he falls, after being tased, and then take him and move him to the other side of the thing. So that is the next step up, which would be active resistance. Now, let's say Hassan is getting very upset with me, and Hassan takes a fighting posture. He goes from yelling and saying, I'm not listening, and he takes and he squares up with me as an officer. This is called aggressive resistance. So now, what can the officer do? The officer can now meet that aggressive resistance with the appropriate amount of force. So what does that mean? Definitely can transition to a less than lethal, a baton, taser, pepper spray, right? Officers, and I'll touch on this briefly, forget about officers. You as a citizen, if you come in and interact in Florida, this is a stand your ground state. You don't have to retreat. But let's go back to the officer situation. So if Hassan takes a fighting stance with me, just a fighting stance, that's a form of aggressive resistance. Now I can use the appropriate amount of force. Now, let's say we get into a lockout, drag out fight. Hassan is fighting me. He's like, I'm not going anywhere. He's fighting me. He's punching me. And he gets the better of me. He gets me on my back. He is now mounted on top of me. Now I'm a law enforcement officer that I gave Hassan a lawful order. He did not comply with me. He fought me. Now I'm on my back. Hassan's on top of me. That is a deadly force situation. Why? Because Hassan has mounted over me. He has control over me. He can come down on my head. He can try to grab my weapon. Now, an officer in that situation is authorized to use deadly force in response to get Hassan off of him, because that's a deadly force situation. So that is the type of resistance. So we have passive, active, aggressive, and deadly force. Now, deadly force is to only be used in a deadly force situation. If somebody else is facing deadly force or us as officers are facing deadly force, we're trained that as the last resort, the absolute last resort. So that is the explanation of resistance. I think to put it into context, a lot of the situations I see, like Hassan said, people think that they're being stopped or something's happening where they didn't do anything. And they think that they have the ability to fight the officer on scene and resolve the issue right there, saying, I didn't do anything, I'm not going anywhere, you're not placing me under arrest, right? And then they resist the officer. And then that's when the officer is legally bound to respond, right? So does that explain the different levels of force? I try to be as thorough as I can. Is there any follow-up questions?
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you. And also just to remind everybody that this program is intended to be an educational program, right? So this is not official advice. You should definitely consult, your attorney or the appropriate authorities for any specific legal advice that you're seeking. This is purely educational, but it's great to kind of have that inside perspective. We did get another question that says, so when we're talking about kind of observing or witnessing an event, is there a certain amount of distance that you're required to maintain, or the officer is just allowed to move you wherever he wants? Or in that situation, I assume that you just kind of would listen to the directive of the officers, but they again don't have the right to tell you to stop recording, but you would just want to adhere to kind of they might need a space around where they're operating.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, me personally, if I was recording something and there was something right there, I would probably be back a little bit because, our cameras have zoom on them. So you can go back a little bit and zoom in, but you definitely have a right to record. Now, what's the right of an officer to say, okay, go back this far? That's up to the officer for whatever reason the officer has, right? So if he says, I want you to go back behind that blue Mustang over there, for example, then you have to go back behind the blue Mustang, right? If they're, to follow the orders, but you definitely have the ability to record. Now, this is something that has happened to me at night and to other officers. If you're recording at night, what does the phone have on it?
Flash.
Yeah, the flash.
It has a light. What happens to the person on the other end of that light? They're blinded.
Yeah.
Right? So if you ever do that at night, you see that you're recording, you see somebody recording, but their light is on at night, that literally blinded me. So is that interfering with the investigation? Absolutely, that's interfering with the investigation, because an officer, they can't see what's going on at night. That's not safe, number one, but it's just not, you don't do that. So don't have your flash on if you're recording in at night, just because you're going to blind the officer, during the investigation.
Excellent. Thank you both. No, this has been a really insightful presentation. I want to spend just a couple of minutes just previewing the PDF that will be available for everyone who sent their emails, and we'll also try to post it on social media. Just going through kind of as a recap of the presentation that we've heard from both Brother Hassan and Brother Nezar.
And this is very important. Please pay attention to this because, we've spoken about a lot of theory, a lot of background, and a lot of personal experience and practical tips. But this will give you a structured, point by point in terms of the interaction with law enforcement and how to ensure you can, interact safely with your rights preserved. Again, an officer, rightfully or wrongfully is in a position to take your life. And that's why it's very, very important to understand how to have a safe interaction with them. And then if they violated your rights, then we can deal with it from the legal side on the back end. But we need to make sure you get through the experience safely and with your rights preserved.
Yes. So this is just a refresher of everything that we went over, and we will make it available. So you learned a little bit about what the Council on American Islamic Relations does. It's here to support Muslim Americans, and we have all of these Know Your Rights available as workshops or trainings.
And each one of those, go back. No, it's very important, guys. There's so much we want to cover, right? I mean, I spoke to you about having issues traveling. We have no time to go into that in today's presentation. A lot of times, especially with the physical events of the traveling, we try to cover a lot in one session, but there's just so much to go into. So please take a look at all of these because we are happy to do future presentations to go in all of these: employment, school discrimination, travel delays. I mean, the list goes on and on. So please make sure you reach out to our team. And Raniah, when you're done with this, or if there's anybody else from the CAIR-Florida team, maybe Nadeem, if you can put in the organization's contact info where they can donate, where they can request more information and presentations, etc.
Yes, that will all be available in the chat box, and you can always get in touch with us via email or phone. So, alhamdulillah. So in a nutshell, your rights obviously remain silent. Don't speak to law enforcement or the FBI without an attorney present. And if you can't afford one, that's never an issue. These are going to be, one can be provided to you. Just as an FYI, you know, for CAIR-Florida, all of the services that we provide are free of charge. So you'll never have to worry about, you know, kind of paying for representation. That's what we exist to support the community with. So in the CAIR, and we went over a lot of these, but the main thing is to provide a setting where, you know, the officer is not concerned for his safety, so that they can kind of be at ease. You could be at ease and everyone gets through it very quickly. Nezar, please jump in at any point. But yeah, keeping your hands on the wheels where they can be seen, turning the dome line off. You're going to show your license and registration. You know, that you're having your passengers do the same thing as far as keeping their hands where they can be seen. They can't search your car unless they have a warrant or there's a probable cause, like concrete evidence. Let's say when I roll down my window, there's something that's seen in my car that would be illicit or something like that. That's what we would call plain view, but otherwise they don't have the right to search your car without your permission. So make sure that you're clear and not, you know, that's not ambiguous. I do not consent to a search. I do not consent to questioning. If you're stopped by police on the street, obviously a lot of folks are out in the nation protesting on a daily right now. So again, police would have a specific reason to approach you and question you. If you are questioned, again, you have to comply with orders. They may pat you down, but just besides identifying who you are, you don't have to answer any of their questions, and you can say, am I free to go, right? So that's what we said. If you're free to go, you're free to go, and there's really nothing else to it.
And this is very important because, you know, the street stop interaction, I know, Ron, you're going to go into more detail, but, you know, these are the three main areas you're likely to interact with officers, right? Number one is when the FBI shows up at your home, you know, and that's almost there's never really good reason to speak with them whatsoever. Ask, do you have a, do you have a warrant? No, you don't have a warrant. Okay, leave your business card. My lawyer will contact you. Don't want to talk to another lawyer. Do not let them in the house. That's it, you know, and stick your grounds, contact CAIR, and we can deal with it. And the same goes for your business. Number two is when you're driving in a car, which we spoke about that briefly. You do have to show the ID when they pull you over. You know, be respectful, but again, you don't have to answer questions. You don't have to consent to a search, but you do have to comply with orders. If they say you're detained or you're being placed under arrest, don't physically resist. Again, do not talk. Especially a lot of times people get arrested and they start talking a lot. You know, unless, you know, again, there's a risk. But if maybe you can say something that'll avoid the arrest, you can take the risk of saying that. But again, remember, just being arrested is not the end of the world. And I'd much rather you're arrested and you're quiet and then we can get you out versus you talking and you got a bad cop and you end up putting yourself in a very difficult situation. So that's the CAIR is the second circumstance. You have to show ID, but again, you don't have to answer questions. Number three is if you're physically approached, you know, on the street, same situation, you know, ask, am I free to go? If I'm free to go, you're free to go. If not, comply with their lawful orders. But I would avoid speaking to them without a lawyer in detail. But again, use the situation. I mean, if the officers, you know, again, you're on the street, you might have witnessed a crime and it's an emergency life or death situation. You got to use your judgment in these circumstances. Go on, go through the presentation because there's a lot of
notes. Please keep interrupting with good points. So to your point, actually, Hassan, the reasons that you might be stopped, because a lot of people are saying, you know, you had no reason to stop me, but you could be near a location where a crime was just committed. You might be, you know, you might fit the description for a suspect, like Brother Nezar had just said. You might be in an area that's being monitored by police or be perceived to be suspicious. So there are, you know, these are some of the reasons that police might be approaching you in the first place on the street. It's not a crime to refuse to ask questions. You don't have to consent to be searched without a warrant. And think about it this way, like if you're on the street and someone comes up to you, right, then they most likely don't have a warrant to search you, your body on the street if they're just meeting you then. So definitely keep that in mind. If you're under arrest and you're being detained, or you're not under arrest and you're free to go, you can ask the officer, again, politely and respectfully. What to do when police come to your house. And actually, we have a quick question coming in, Brother Nezar, about police being able to turn off their body cameras. So we'll get to that, inshallah. But in your house, the same thing.
You want me to answer that now or at the end?
It's up to you. So like if, yeah, is it a quick response or is it?
I'll do it at the end. Just ask me at the end. I don't want to mess up your flow. You're doing pretty good. You're doing good.
Sounds good. So the theme for if the cops come to your home, the same theme, right? They need a warrant signed by a judge. Also read it. Make sure that it is actually for your address. Make sure that the warrant has your name on it. Make sure that is the warrant limited, or do they have, you know, full access to everything? So make sure that you read the warrant. And then obviously we went through some exceptions as well. If someone called in a domestic disturbance, or if there's an emergency, they hear someone screaming for help, or you open your door and they see something, then those are some of the reasons that they might be able to enter your home. But always stay inside your home. Always ask for the police badge and identification. This actually goes to a point where someone said, you know, how do you know if FBI is legitimate or if it's fake FBI? Well, first of all, you really don't have to worry about it, because either way, you're not speaking to them. You're telling them that you're going to contact your attorney. But then you can always ask for their name and their badge number and have that information. Anytime that you contact CAIR or a civil rights organization after the fact, all of those details become incredibly important. So getting names, getting badge numbers, getting that information as far as when people came, all of those details are incredibly important.
Staying home is very important. Staying inside the home. This is if the law enforcement knocks, don't go outside to interact with them. You have more protections within your home. You know, unless you're on probation where the officers are allowed to come in, or unless they have a warrant. Or there is an articulable reason, like somebody screaming for help on the inside, which again, these situations don't come up and they can't just lie about it. It's very difficult for them. So generally, if you're in your home, you're protected, and it's easier to get yourself in a difficult situation if you exit the house. So stay within the home, ask for the ID, ask for their contact info. Don't then interact. If they don't have a warrant, they have no right. My lawyer will be contacting you. Thank you very much. That's not a sign of guilt. That cannot be used against you. It's the best way to protect you.
Absolutely. Now, in the case that you are arrested or taken to a police station, and we went through this as well. So if you're arrested, then the police do have the right to search the immediate area around you. So that's a possibility. Brother Nezar mentioned they're going to read to you your Miranda rights, at which point you can say, I wish to speak to an attorney. And after that, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to speak at all. They might try multiple times to keep asking questions, but you can just keep, repeating that you need an attorney. You can ask for the officer's name and badge number, and always, like we said, just be safe. The primary goal of any interaction is to stay safe, and then any action as far as legal action can be taken after the fact, but make sure your hands are where they can see them. Don't touch the officer, don't engage physically, everything that we already have gone over, alhamdulillah. So we went over the use of force as it's outlined by the sheriff's office, one example here in Florida. And it just goes to show that, again, de-escalate the situation, right? Don't get into a situation where things get out of hand. Do your best to kind of de-escalate by not resisting, recording, having witnesses, and having that information. So we're wrapping up here. We went over all of this, never run, never touch a police officer, even if your intent is very friendly. Like sometimes as a Muslim community, we're very used to hugging people. I mean, hopefully not during COVID. But if you're going to put your arm on someone's shoulder, that's not the case here with law enforcement. Just be very aware of what you're doing and how your body, language is saying. Okay, have the witnesses, if you're able to be aware of your situation, understand who was around you at the time of the event, get the recordings if possible, verbally protest and verbally verbalize what's happening, right? Verbalize, I do not consent to a search. Verbalize, you guys are arresting me and you haven't read my Miranda rights. You guys are arresting me and you haven't told me why I'm being arrested.
Hold on. I just want to jump in real quick because you said something that comes up a lot. An officer doesn't need to Mirandize you to arrest you. An officer only needs to Mirandize you if you're being interrogated and you're in custody. Very clear difference.
Okay, that's an important part.
I've heard that quite a bit. If you're under arrest, you're under arrest. And you don't tell the officer. And again, I think you hit on the point here is don't physically resist. That's the only thing that I think that we need to focus back on. But don't try to run away and say, oh, you didn't read me my rights, you can't arrest me. That has nothing to do with Miranda. But yes, if they're going to interrogate you in custody, they have to Mirandize you. That's the law. Right?
But do you have to be told why you're being arrested?
Technically, no. But it's the interaction is very difficult. Most officers will speak to you and try to speak to you. To be honest with you, that's kind of a what if that I've never even heard of happening once in my whole career that an officer just doesn't say anything to anybody, goes up to arrest them and puts them in jail. There is conversation, this is happening and, that's happening. Certainly if the officer Mirandizes you and you say, I'm not going to talk to you without my attorney, that doesn't mean the officer can't continue his job. He or she may place you under arrest and say, well, okay, you don't want to talk to me. I'm placing you under arrest for XYZ. They place you under arrest and they move forward. Now, going back to your point, once you're under arrest, whatever you say on your own is being recorded, most likely. Makes sense? So just know that, because our body cams are always on, and we'll go back. We have a question about that. I'll go back to that.
Just remember, in that interaction, your job is not to hold the officer accountable. So, oh, you didn't do this. Oh, you didn't do that. But it's not the time for it.
Yeah.
Really, your goal is to get out of that interaction in a safe way, whatever that means. So just the main thing is not the arrest. See, a lot of times people think being arrested is the end of the world. And that's why there's so much tension in that moment. And yes, it sucks to get arrested, but the main thing is you don't want to get convicted, especially if you're innocent, or get hurt at the scene, which is even worse. So you want to avoid physically being hurt. I mean, let's understand what are our objectives. Our objectives is avoid being physically hurt and avoid getting convicted, especially for something you didn't do. So the way to do that is, if you're not free to go, again, comply with the officers. They arrest you, you let them arrest you, whatever. And that's how you avoid getting physically hurt, physically complying. How do you avoid getting convicted later? By exercising your rights orally. I don't consent to a search, and I don't want to talk without a lawyer, and that's it. And then let the lawyers deal with everything on the back end.
No, excellent points. Thank you both. Okay, so remember, seek the lawyer immediately. So even if you can't afford one, you have lawyers who are available to you, either via CAIR, also not via CAIR, like it's your constitutional right to be represented for U.S. citizens by a lawyer. Don't say anything without an attorney, and don't make any decisions without consulting your lawyer first. I was innocent, so this is fine for me to plead this way, or fine for me to speak with this. No, just always assume that you should rely on the expertise. So that is wonderful. So I think there were just a couple of last minute questions, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you guys. I know we're going a little over, but there's some great questions that the community is asking. So why don't we just cover the body cams for now, and then we'll see if we can wrap up, inshallah.
All right, so body cam currently is not regulated by state law. Current body cam is regulated by policy, agency policy. And this is in response to the community outcry saying, you know what, we want body cam footage of the interaction between the officer and the people that they're having the transaction with. So their policy dictates when to turn it off and when to turn it on, and that's in every other agency, and they're not a mirror. They don't look like each other. Every agency has their own policy. Okay, now, I think specifically your question was, can an officer turn the body cam off? I can't speak to any other policy, but generally the policy is the same. Whenever we're having interactions with somebody, traffic stop, investigation, anything, our body cam is to be activated. It's even getting specific now. Before we even get out of our car, it's supposed to be activated. Now, there are times that the body cam can be shut off, okay? That is not in the middle of a fight. Like if the officer's running up to somebody and then magically the body cam gets shut off, that's not the appropriate time for the body cam to be shut off. There are circumstances where the body cam can be shut off. Example, victim privacy issues, hospital settings, or investigative things. If, like, say, for instance, officers need to go speak about an investigation or something, that they can be shut off. But I don't even really think the public has an issue with those things. The issue is they're scared the officer is going to deactivate the body cam before they use force on somebody. So if that happens, which is, again, that's something that I've only heard very rarely happen. The state attorney's office is going to take that into account, right? Your attorney should be made aware of that, and there should certainly be an internal affairs investigation filed against that officer.
Absolutely. And guys, we have a lot of great questions, but just to be respectful of everyone's time, I mean, there's some specific questions as far as what to do in a school setting, what to do in a travel setting. So like we said, there's many series. We can do, you know, a workshop or a training for your specific halaqah, for your masjid. So please contact CAIR. The contact information is in the chat box and in the comments, and we're happy to respond to any specific questions and also any requests for workshops or trainings. But there is just one that I think is incredibly important because we've seen this happen, unfortunately, with Philando Castillo. So if you are carrying a concealed weapon while being pulled over, do you let the officer know that you are carrying and present your CCW card at the time?
That is a good practice, to present your CCW card to the officer. There's nothing in the state legislature that demands that, though. That is not part of the Florida state statute, but I can tell you that it is a very nice courtesy. I personally like to be aware of that. If there's more than one firearm on where I'm standing, I would like to know that. So that is a very nice courtesy, and we're very appreciative of that, of officers. When someone has handed us their driver's license and their CCW, that's an indicator, them telling us, hey, I'm legally armed, and here's my proof that I'm legally armed. That's perfectly fine. So it is not required by statute, but it is a nice courtesy.
Perfect. And any closing remarks before we end, though, before everyone leaves? I do want to reintroduce Sister Macy for some really important community announcements, especially for those joining from the North Carolina community with CAIR National. But I guess before we get to that, Brother Nezar, Brother Hassan, thank you both for your speaking, and any type of closing remark that you would want to leave us with as far as our rights.
You know, this has been a very critical conversation, and really this message cannot be overemphasized, because no matter how many times we say it, when you're in that situation, it can become very difficult to act on it, you know, and it's very important to go away with the key takeaways in the situation. All right. Just a quick point on the concealed license. Don't go. I got a concealed. Go grab. You know, again.
Yeah, don't do that.
Really, and it's not about what the laws are in terms of police, or what they should or shouldn't be doing, or what the obligations are of the police. Trust me, we do trainings for the police ourselves, where we train them on de-escalation and respecting rights and conflict resolution and all that good stuff. But you know, in these situations, you can't control the officer, you can control yourself. It's very important to understand what your rights are and how to interact in a safe way. So when you're interacting with law enforcement, be cognizant, keep your arms visible. You know, keep your arms visible. Don't go grab things without, have that good sense of communication. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and grab my license. It's located here. You know, if for some reason where your license, where your registration is, if you have a weapon in there, keep your arms on the steering wheel. You know, sir, I have a weapon there. It's a legal weapon. I have my license as well, and my registration is there. How would you like me to proceed? Be very careful. Do not in any way give an excuse for a bad cop to abuse you physically or abuse your rights. But the closing remarks, really, you know, Allah's given us a brain, so use it and control your emotion, interact in a way, understanding your rights and using the context. If the FBI is showing up at your home, at your business, do not allow them in. Say, don't physically resist, because if they have a warrant, they're going to be able to come in. But say, I don't consent to a search and I don't want to talk to you without a lawyer. Get their business card, contact CAIR-Florida can assist with that. If you're pulled over, again, keep your arms visible. Comply with the lawful orders, show your ID. If they command you out of the car, say, am I being detained? Yeah, I have to get out of the car. Yes, they say yes, you have to get out. If they arrest you, let them arrest you. Deal with all of that on the back end. But if you get arrested, again, say, I don't want to talk without a lawyer. It's really, you should divide this into two things, your tongue and your body. When it comes to commandments of your body by the law enforcement officers, go here, come here, put your hands behind your back, whatever. You have to comply with their orders physically. But when it comes to interaction, you don't have to speak with them besides providing the ID. And you would do well to say, I don't want to talk without a lawyer. That's really what all of this comes down to, inshallah, so that you can keep yourself physically safe in that interaction, and you can keep yourself legally safe by avoiding a conviction or avoiding becoming an informant, etc. So that's my synopsis of this whole conversation.
Guys, first I want to thank CAIR-Florida very much. Hassan and Raniah and Nadeem for putting this very important and very timely training together. Thank you for inviting me. You guys are a staple and the backbone of the community. So thank you very much. Just closing, with me, I know there's a lot of tension right now between the community and law enforcement. And I just want to, just touch on that for a second. I certainly know what it feels like to be stereotyped, as an American Muslim. I've been discriminated against, I've been profiled, and I'm in an interesting position now because that very thing is happening to me as a law enforcement officer. I can tell you that the overwhelming majority, and it's funny because when you hear me talk, you're gonna hear like, hold on, that's what Muslims say when people accuse them of being terrorists. The overwhelming majority of the men and women that I work with are family-oriented, very honorable, very respectful, and they really do care about people. Having said that, at the same time, there are some people that don't need to have a badge, that don't deserve to have the badge, and it makes some very bad decisions. And unfortunately, like we've seen recently, Mr. Floyd has died because of that decision and the officers there, the decision of the fellow officers on the scene. However, there are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in this country. There are over 2 million plus sworn officers. And literally, what's happening to law enforcement is the same thing I feel when I'm being stereotyped as a Muslim. When a Muslim does something bad or does an act of terrorism, you have certain individuals in society that blame all of the Muslim community and say it's Islam, it's the evil teachings of Islam, so on and so forth. And I find myself in a unique position because I'm hearing that same thing now about the job that I currently do, and that's serve and protect. I take that job very seriously, as many of the people in the uniform do. So know that, and be balanced and have patience. Thank you guys for Hassan and team for doing this training. I think it's very important, and I wish there was more of it because people need to know what their rights are, and they need to know, what police do and how they do it and how they're trained to do it. So there can be better transparency. So thanks, guys. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Brother Nezar. I really appreciate that. And one of the things that CAIR does is represent. And so we thank you for representing the Muslim American community as well, and for being the community leader that you are. And I think we need more folks like you in law enforcement. So Jazakallahu khairan. Sister Macy, I apologize. It was a very lively conversation that that a lot of folks wanted to keep going. But I'm going to introduce you. You're on mute. You have a special announcement for the community. And again, Sister Macy is really one of the folks who helped start CAIR-Florida from the beginnings of when it first was here, and knows so much about community work and how to empower the American Muslim community. So we thank you for your leadership role in the community as well, and inshallah, hope to support you in any way that we can.
Thank you so much. I would like to bring up our Brother Abbas, Dr. Abbas, to talk a little bit about our research going on right now for the CAIR National Survey. Brother Abbas, please take over.
Assalamu alaikum. How's everybody doing? Can everybody hear me?
Alaikum, Dr. Abbas. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum, Hassan, Nezar, Raniah. Assalamu alaikum, CAIR-Florida. Wonderful to see you guys. I want to apologize first. I'm sitting in my backyard, mashallah. It's a nice day, and I was doing some grilling, and I was learning deeply from you guys as we're going through this. So thank you, CAIR-Florida. For those of you in North Carolina watching, CAIR-Florida really is, mashallah, one of our absolute best, chapters in terms of effort, energy, thoroughness, professionalism, collegiality, the ability to work across so many different levels in a local context like that. Being based in Georgia, right next to you, North Carolina, we understand that Southern politics are a little bit tough sometimes, a little bit tricky. And it really takes a profound relationship building and trust building and persistence to do what CAIR-Florida has done. So hats off to you, CAIR-Florida, for doing that work. And for everybody in North Carolina, thank you all for joining and taking the time to do this. Sister Macy, it's been wonderful working with you over the last year or so as we put together some of this effort. So I won't take up too much time because I know, mashallah, people have been attentive and energized on this conversation. But as Rania was saying, there are many know your rights types of activities and seminars that we can do. However, in addition to being sort of defensive and reactive and being prepared for situations where we may need to defend our community, in addition to that, we also have to be extremely proactive to take the fight against Islamophobia to the institutions themselves ahead of time. And what I'd like to talk to you just briefly about today is the need to do that when it comes to our public education systems. Parents on the call right now, community leaders on the call, young teenagers with younger brothers and sisters, young adults on the call right now. You all know, we all know that our students are having a very hard time in public schools. All right, the public school environment, I can only imagine, is profoundly worse from the time that I was a student. At that time it was before 9/11, and Islamophobia was already bad. Can you imagine what it feels like for somebody in North Carolina, a 6th grader, a 7th grader, an elementary school child in North Carolina in the Trump environment? I have 3 children myself, and when Trump was elected, my daughter was scared to go to school. She asked me, do I tell them, Daddy, that we're not Muslim if they ask? Okay. And she was young. I mean, she was in kindergarten or 1st grade, and she has a father who does this for a living, right? And we have a proud family. We have a great community. My children experienced this in a school that is extremely diverse, extremely tolerant, and they already have these kind of sensibilities with the family and the community that we're a part of. Can you imagine what it's like for the children in rural North Carolina, on the outskirts, in the suburbs of Charlotte, in the suburbs of Raleigh, in Greensboro? Parents, I'm sorry, but you don't know what's actually happening with your kids. You don't know how tough it is for them. They're not sharing everything with you. And children, you need to be able to talk to your peers, your community members. So what we've done is we've tried to make an appeal to say no more. We are going to do the research necessary, do the outreach necessary to build and design programs from the ground up to deal with Islamophobia in public schools for the long term. So what we've done over the last year is a lot of quiet experimentation. I've been working actively in Baltimore, in Virginia. We're working with CAIR chapters in Boston, in New York City, in Georgia, and with you, North Carolina, to do a number of different things. And the center point of our activity is to gather data, is to get the numbers straight about how students are feeling in schools about Islamophobia, about bullying, about the way that their teachers treat them, about whether or not the administrators know what Eid is, whether they know what Ramadan is, whether they care what Eid is or what Ramadan is, whether or not students feel accommodated in the classroom, outside of the classroom. We find more often than not that the discomfort and unease and pressure students feel within the school system doesn't necessarily come from ignorant peers or other kids. It comes from ignorant teachers, ignorant administrators who ask somebody in the 5th grade, what does jihad mean? And why are all Muslims terrorists? Or when 9/11 comes up, they ask the kid who's never even heard about it, who's Muslim, who happens to be Muslim, to explain to the whole class what it feels like. Okay, that people of their religion may have committed this, this incident. So all I'm trying to say is it's a tough situation. Most of us know how bad it is. We have a survey that is the cornerstone of our activity. With this survey, if you take this survey, it empowers our team at National and the emerging network of CAIR, CAIR community activists and folks who are working to build the CAIR network in North Carolina. It empowers us to go to the school districts. It empowers us to go to the state representatives. It empowers us to go to principals, to talk to our community members and get people to line up on this issue. So I implore you, parents, community leaders there, any students that are on right now, I know that you have instructions and you've received notice about the bullying survey, the anti-bullying survey. This survey is opened at particular times. It's an online survey, so I have to make sure that, you know, we have a kind of control methodology here. So Sister Macy's communicated with you about the times. I believe tomorrow, 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. the survey will be open. It won't take you more than 10 or 15 minutes. And I do a lot with that data, and I'll get back to you, and we'll be able to sort of work and empower our communities to do that. So please, please support Sister Macy and the others in North Carolina trying to build out this work. It's a lot of tedious activity. It's a lot of tedious work. It's very time consuming, but you can help us, inshallah, to make this effective. And so take the time to do that. Sister Macy, have I missed anything?
Yes, I just want to let you know that the survey will open tonight at 9 o'clock for 1 hour, and we have 9:30 tomorrow morning and 4 o'clock in the evening. You have to join the Zoom meeting in order for me to share the link, because this is going to be a protected survey portal. So hopefully, inshallah, I'm hoping that you already received this information from your community leaders, and I have a special request for the community leaders. Please share this information. I have sent all the information that you need in your mailbox. Look at it on your website or on your WhatsApp. And if you have any questions, I have already linked those survey links in the chat box. So if you have any question, you can contact me. My email address is on it. So hopefully we will see you tonight and tomorrow for 2 more sessions, inshallah.
Yes, and I really have to commend you both and your work, and emphasize this to everyone who's viewing, is that, you know, when we talk about representation, we always say that no one can lead Muslim narratives better than Muslims, and a lot of the ways that we do that is to get data about our own community, right? Other than letting other people speak on behalf of what the issues in our community are and what the statistics are, if we can gather our own data and speak on behalf of ourselves, it becomes very powerful and very impactful. And you know, elected officials, school officials, they all like to see that type of data and that input. So it's very valuable. I encourage you all to please participate. And I'm excited to see the results of the project. So with that, I'm going to close out and say Jazakumullahu khairan for joining us. And, you know, thank you, everyone. Please be in contact for CAIR-Florida. We are here to serve you. Please, we're very thankful for anyone who is able to support our work. That's how we offer our services free of charge to anyone who needs them. And with that, if Hassan and Brother Nezar and Sister Macy don't have anything else, I'll say Jazakumullahu khairan for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair, Nezar. And before you go, real quick, I want to thank one of my dear friends, Brother Munzar Talib, who, mashallah, he made a $100 donation on our Facebook Live. We had about 60, 70 people live. And he said, listen, if we each chip in $100, we can raise 5,000. So if you want to support, CAIR-Florida's got an amazing legal team. We've got about 8, 9 lawyers on staff. Literally, I get calls. Allah is my witness. I'm sitting with my kids playing, and then 11 o'clock p.m. that the FBI is at somebody's home and drive right over there and make sure their rights are protected. And that's just one example. The team works tireless day in and day out. I remember one night, literally working the whole night on an issue involving the FBI and the Muslim community until 7, 8 a.m. And that's when Omar Saleh, one of the other lawyers, I said, Omar, all right, tag, you're it. I'm going to get some sleep now. You got it. And literally he was up at 6, 7 a.m. continuing the shift for another 12 hours. So the team works day in and day out, nonstop, to protect our community. We save people's lives, we protect our faith, we protect our freedom. Alhamdulillah, we can't do this without your generous support. So if you found this presentation beneficial, please do click the share button and let people know. I never want to hear of a community member speaking with the FBI again without a lawyer. And we got to be real. Our challenges when it relates to law enforcement as Muslims that are not Black is very different than the Black population, whether they're Muslim or not. And frankly, I think we have it a lot easier than a lot of other minorities. But as it relates to the Muslim community and law enforcement interactions with the FBI in particular, whether you're Black, white, Arab, Asian, whatever it is, never speak to the FBI without a lawyer. It can be very dangerous to do. And support our effort to protect the community. Share this video and click the donate button, inshallah. Do whatever you can. There's about 60, 70. If everybody does $10, that's $700, mashallah. If everybody does $100, that's $7,000. So do your part so we can keep serving the community. And please connect with Sister Macy and do what she did here. I remember 10 years ago, there were like no full-time staff members at CAIR-Florida in the Tampa region, with Sister Sylvia working part-time. And alhamdulillah, they invested and they made help lay the groundwork for CAIR-Florida to be one of the best organizations that it is today. Likewise, you can do the same thing in North Carolina. I'll be happy to support you. So please connect with her and let's make that a reality. Click the donate button on Facebook, click share, and let's keep in touch, and check the comments section, inshallah, for how you can get help from CAIR-Florida and how you can support our work. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you, Nezar. I love you, bro.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for
Assalamu alaikum,
joining.
everyone.
All right.